Cold War, an era defined by ideological struggle, fear of nuclear annihilation, and a pervasive atmosphere of espionage, shaped the world's political and economic systems from the late 1940s into the early 1990s. It was not a conventional war with battles fought in fields or cities. Instead, the battlefield was a global contest between the United States and the Soviet Union, two superpowers representing opposing ideologies: capitalism and democracy, led by the US, and communism, led by the Soviet Union. Both sides believed their way of life was superior, and the battle for ideological dominance would come to define much of the century. At the heart of the Cold War was the division of Europe, most notably symbolized by the Berlin Wall, a stark physical reminder of the ideological split between East and West. In the aftermath of World War II, Europe was divided into two spheres of influence: the Western Bloc, primarily controlled by the United States and its allies, and the Eastern Bloc under Soviet control. This split not only reshaped borders, but created a persistent divide that would last nearly half a century, shaping the foreign policies and decisions of countries worldwide. Espionage was a critical tool used throughout the Cold War, as intelligence agencies on both sides worked relentlessly to gather information, sabotage enemy operations, and deceive one another. The CIA, FBI, and MI6 represented Western intelligence, while the KGB, GRU, and STASI were the Soviet counterparts. From early on, both sides undertook covert missions to infiltrate the other's government, military installations, and research projects, seeking to gain any advantage in this high-stakes war. Undercover agents, double agents, and elaborate spy networks often worked behind the scenes, leaving a shadowy world of secrets that later gave rise to numerous thrillers and spy novels. High-profile defections, such as that of Soviet spies like Oleg Gordievsky, who provided critical intelligence to the British, helped unveil some of the most dangerous secrets of the Soviet system. The era of espionage reached its peak during dramatic moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, which almost triggered full-scale nuclear war. Tensions had soared after the Soviet Union installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the United States. For nearly 2 weeks, the world stood on edge as President John F. Kennedy and Premier Nikita Khrushchev faced off in a deadly game of brinkmanship. It was only through secret negotiations and the back-channel diplomacy of individuals, intelligence officers, and covert diplomats that both sides managed to defuse the crisis. But even when direct confrontations like this didn't end in war, other conflicts across the globe, fueled by Cold War tensions, became a bloody testament to the ongoing power struggle between East and West. While the Cold War rarely saw combat between the US and the Soviet Union directly, it manifested in proxy wars across the world. Conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Central America were not just about regional disputes, but part of the larger ideological battle. Both superpowers were eager to expand their spheres of influence by supporting opposing factions in these regions. In Vietnam, the US backed the South Vietnamese government to stop the spread of communism, while the Soviet Union and China supported the North. Similarly, in Afghanistan, the Soviet invasion of 1979 became a direct challenge, leading the US to arm and support Afghan rebel groups known as the Mujahideen. These proxy wars were dangerous not only for the countries involved, but also for global stability, as both superpowers could have easily escalated tensions to direct military confrontation. Alongside the conventional proxy battles, the Cold War also saw an intense nuclear arms race, as both the US and the USSR sought to outdo one another in building vast arsenals of nuclear weapons. The US, after dropping atomic bombs on Japan in 1945, quickly began developing its arsenal during the Cold War, culminating in the stockpiling of thousands of warheads. The Soviet Union followed suit, and by the 1960s, both nations had enough nuclear firepower to obliterate each other many times over. This deadly accumulation of weapons led to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, a concept that suggested any nuclear attack by one superpower would lead to total retaliation and the end of both. Despite the chilling prospect of nuclear war, MAD paradoxically became a form of stability, as both sides were too afraid to cross the nuclear threshold. Alongside these overt conflicts, the Cold War gave birth to the space race, another arena for superpower rivalry. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite, which caused shockwaves around the world. This achievement set the stage for a battle of space exploration and technology that had both military and political ramifications. The Soviets' early victories were a wake-up call for the US, and the race to explore space became a powerful form of national pride and competition. Eventually, in 1969, the United States would achieve the historic feat of landing a man on the moon with the Apollo 11 mission. While these achievements were celebrated, they also served as a reminder of the immense pressure the superpowers placed on each other to stay ahead in every scientific and technological endeavor. Over time, the persistent costs of this Cold War struggle took their toll. Both superpowers poured massive resources into defense and intelligence efforts while neglecting domestic issues. In the Soviet Union, economic stagnation, political repression, and a failing planned economy began to take their toll on the people. The arms race was draining resources and unable to keep up with the technological innovations of the West. Amidst this crisis, new leadership emerged in the Soviet Union, most notably Mikhail Gorbachev, whose reforms like glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, began the process of easing Cold War tensions. By the 1980s, the global political landscape had begun to change. The US, under President Ronald Reagan, aggressively confronted the Soviet Union on the world stage, while Gorbachev's willingness to negotiate on arms reduction agreements helped ease tensions. In 1989, after decades of division, the Berlin Wall, the symbol of Cold War division, came down as East Germany opened its borders. This event marked a massive turning point and was followed by the swift collapse of communist regimes across Eastern Europe. The Cold War was finally ending as the Soviet Union itself dissolved in 1991, effectively bringing an end to the ideological struggle. Though the Cold War has been over for decades, its legacy is still felt today. It shaped political alliances, fostered global tensions, and defined how the world looked at war, diplomacy, and human rights for an entire era. The fallout of the Cold War reshaped Europe, fragmented global trade, and ultimately marked the shift in the global balance of power that allowed for the emergence of a new American-led world order. And even though the nuclear threat that loomed over much of the Cold War has diminished, espionage and intelligence gathering have only continued to evolve, as the political and technological tools of the Cold War are still in use today, albeit in new forms. The Cold War may have ended without a single shot being fired directly between the US and the Soviet Union, but the struggle it embodied, from espionage, nuclear threats, global conflict, and political upheaval, will never be forgotten. It changed the course of history, and its impact is still rippling through the global political arena even today.